Okay. Well, let's get started, everybody. Try to be punctual. So my name is Casey Dubravcic. I'm the owner and operator of Revitalize Ketamine Clinic. We have locations in Flagstaff, Sedona, and Prescott Valley. I also own ROHCT Wellness Bar, which is a bigger vision: revitalize, optimize, and harmonize clinic and therapeutics. And then I'm also the co-founder of EPIK Biosciences, which is a pharmaceutical development company. And so I'm a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner. Next slide, please. Thank you. I've been in healthcare since 2004. I work in the intensive care unit, the cardiovascular intensive care unit, inpatient, outpatient behavioral health units, train electroconvulsive therapy, seen people at their worst, basically. I worked at a community mental health center. So I dealt with like street schizophrenics, and I was only child provider at the community mental health center, the guidance center in Flagstaff for a couple of years, and kind of recognized that everything more or less falls from trauma. And we know trauma is very subjective. And what I also recognized was that there's really a lot of room for improvement in healthcare in general. A lot of people are just simply treating symptoms. We opened Revitalize in 2021, and I really recognize the need for a more holistic kind of approach when it comes to wellness and health in general. Go ahead, I'll be on next slide. And so after being in healthcare for like 20 years, again, I recognize there's a lot of room for improvement. And I don't really like the pill for every problem approach. It's just, very jaded. You think of mood super basically as a waveform: depression, anhedonia, kind of I don't care is down here, anxiety, hypervigilance, that kind of pucker state up here. And people with trauma bounce back and forth a lot quicker between those two. Pretty much every medication that I ever prescribed: SSRIs, SNRI, mood stabilizers, antipsychotics, benzodiazepines, hypnotics, about 10 to 30% effective long term, and just kind of switching that waveform. So you may be less depressed, you may be less anxious, you may be less mobility, maybe less suicidality, in general, kind of less everything. And my opinion, and a growing number of psychiatric providers, is that those symptoms are really your psyche's cries for help. Hey, what we're doing isn't working. This sucks. And rather than kind of make everything okay-ish, I'm really passionate about helping people treat those root causes. So that's what we're talking about today. All right. So the three tenets of our treatment at Revitalize and ROHCT: name it to tame it. So kind of validate that experience for ourselves, and feel it to heal it. And that's what all the ego dissolution agents are really good at fast tracking. When they zoom out far enough, you can find that gift. And then ultimately making that shift from this happened to me to this happened for me. So kind of getting out of that victim mindset to some extent and really empowering yourself again to really get back to living your best life. Go back to slide real. So this client did this artwork after her series of treatments. And if you horizontally divide it into sixths, you can see her trajectory. And I think it's a really beautiful visualization of the kind of transformations that we're seeing in our clinic. So at the top, there's these bursts of radical authenticity: feeling safe to feeling safe, feeling loved and feeling okay. And for the most part, it's covered up by a lot of darkness. Through the series of six that we do at Revitalize, we aren't obviously changing anyone's past. We aren't changing their present. We're giving them an opportunity to change their perspective. And then by the end, they're really existing much more in that radical authenticity, that feeling safe to feel safe and feel loved and feel okay. So as I get the chills like every day at work, watching people figure it out, watching people remember how capable they've always been. And so really plugging back into their power. So much better than traditional psychiatry. I really love it. All right, next slide, please, Gabrielle. So here's our objectives for today. My intention: first, we're going to define trauma. Then we're going to talk about the coping strategies, aka most diagnoses. Then we're going to talk about how we hold our trauma. Then we're going to talk about, in general, ego dissolution agents, aka psychedelics. We're going to talk about setting, and experience. We're also going to talk about what I would argue is the most important thing about the use of these agents as medicines, and that's integration and sustainability. So my intention is always less over time. And so I'm really a fan of less is more. And like I said, everything in moderation, including moderation. And then we're gonna have some time for some questions and answers, hopefully. All right, next slide, please, Gabriel. So let's talk about trauma. Again, I think everything comes from trauma. Everything is a coping strategy for trauma. There's those big capital bold P's of trauma, and that's your early, often physical, sexual, emotional abuse or neglect. Also like war trauma, all those big things that people think of normally when they think of trauma. Then there's also those little T's. So like you're watching a funny movie with a loved one, a sad part comes on with a puppy, and you're like, oh, isn't that sad? And then they're like, oh, you're stupid, that's not sad. Like, ouch. Those little invalidations, and they really add up. And so we know trauma is very subjective in that one person can see their best friend ever blown up next to them on the battlefield and not be terribly affected because of genetic factors, because of resiliency. Someone else can be called a name once on the schoolyard. It can haunt them forever. It has a large part to do with your empathy, how connected you are to your own emotionality, as well as the emotionality of those around you, and that greater collective emotionality. I always say to my clients, intelligence and empathy is kind of a deadly combination because people are able to hold on to a lot. In our current evolutionary state, we're able to hold the empathic load of up to 120 people, no more than that, really. And so, really, you're exposed to so much more than that on a day-to-day basis. Turn on the news, drive through town, and so, like evolutionarily, like all this stuff happened too quickly. We should be going to sleep with the sun, waking up with the sun, living off the land with like 13 families, where everyone's a cog in the wheel, and that your role is super well appreciated and needed for the tribe to thrive, and that gets lost in the economy scale. So we're all a combination of four main types of trauma, and all trauma is healable and or integratable given the right setting, and circumstances. And so next slide, please. So four types of trauma: main trauma, your own historical trauma. That's what most people think of as trauma. So it's a recatecholamine or stressor exposure. Welcome, welcome. Come on, amazing. Thanks for being here. Go out this. Um, and so your own historical trauma, your catecholamine or stressor exposure that you've had since your parents' two zygotes first met, the egg and the sperm. All the stress your mom had during pregnancy, your actual childbirth, everything before you started forming concrete memories, and everything where you're at now. That's just the first type of trauma. Second type of trauma is what we call intergenerational epigenetics. So we know at least 5 generations behind us, there's some evidence to support as many as 17 generations. The trauma that our great 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 grandparents went through prior to procreating mutated their genetic expression at least enough to pass on increased hypervigilance to us, which is good if we live in a township surrounded by saber-toothed tigers, not necessarily if you're in a relatively safe environment. Third type of trauma is what I call societal. And so, in general, living in a patriarchal capitalistic society with an economy of scale and a largely disconnected family unit is pretty bad for our brains. And that's the reality that we're existing in on a day-to-day basis. The fourth type of trauma is what I call environmental. And so you're talking about like microplastics, cell phone radiation, all those things that really you can't avoid. You wear tinfoil hat, move out in the woods, and you're still going to get some 5G. And so the third and the fourth type of trauma, the societal and environmental, often reactivate the historical and intergenerational traumas. That's what pushes people back through our doors in general, in like kind of broad aspects, like walls are up. Like you go out there and it's not safe to feel safe. We're all trying to protect ourselves. And so like I'm not gonna let that person be a butthead to me in traffic. I'm gonna cut them off just where they cut me off. And so it's we're all works in progress. I think that's important to recognize. Everything is a moving target. Go ahead, I'll be on next slide. So again, we talked about the subjectivity of trauma. There's an experiential component of trauma. And so everyone kind of experiences it differently. I like the Doors of Perception, Aldous Huxley's book. He talks about, human language being a huge blessing and a curse, and then it's a giant reduction valve. And so when one person experiences joy, another person experiences it far differently. That's why there's so many cool modalities up and coming, like somatic experiencing therapy, Peter Levine's work. What we're talking about today. So we're all layers of onions. Again, those big capital T's, those little italic T's. I don't really like any diagnoses in psychiatry anymore besides trauma. That being said, I don't like PTSD because it makes people feel damaged, it makes people feel broken, it makes people feel unhealable. So I like post-traumatic stress injury, more empowering, kind of, again, name it to tame it, feel it to heal it, and ultimately making that internal narrative shift from this happened to me to this happened for me. And so, two kind of Buddhist sayings that I really like that I think help kind of tie it together is that one of the biggest forms of human suffering is looking at an old photo of yourself and thinking you're the same person. We have the capacity to completely change our internal dialogue and how we see ourselves in the universe, walking out of this door from walking into this door. And that exists with or without any of the ego dissolution agents. That's just something that we have the capacity to do. Another one, holding on to resentment is like swallowing poison, expecting someone else to die. It doesn't normally work. All right, good. And so, again, I don't like any other diagnoses in psychiatry besides trauma. And that being said, all those other coping strategies, aka diagnoses, were born on purpose to protect ourselves. So we all open our coping strategy toolbox, and hopefully on the top of that toolbox are healthy coping strategies when things are hard. Listening to music, talking to a friend, dancing, movement, eating good food, reading a book. And then when those things don't work and it still sucks, we're going to go to less healthy coping strategies. So isolation, depression, anxiety, hypervigilance, trying to protect yourselves, histrionic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, substance use disorder. I call those bipolar light. Bipolar 2 is like 4 days or less of 4 hours of sleep or less, and a lot more high risk, high reward potential activities, like painting your house all night or going to gambling and thinking I want to win big. And then bipolar 1 is 7 days of that kind of sleep behavior, 4 hours or less of sleep a night for 7 days, and an inpatient hospital. Keep going down the ladder. Not everyone hits every rung of the ladder going down. Is I worked at the community mental health center, like I said in the introduction, and I saw a lot of paranoid schizophrenics people on the streets. And you look at their ACEs score, which is their adverse childhood experiences score, and the ACEs is really good. Shows us what happened to people that should not have happened to them. It doesn't show us what didn't happen to people that should have. And so oftentimes neglect is held far worse than abuse for a lot of people because those needs are never met. Where they sometimes they're met with abusers. There is some like comeback. Oh, I'm so sorry I beat the crud out of you. I still love you. And that's rough. And with neglect, there's no meeting of those needs. And so it's really interesting when you look at that ACEs score. And so like, and then you look at how they present. And in general, the more severe the ACEs score is, the more severe the coping strategies are. And so we see paranoid schizophrenics, their reality was so unsafe for so long, they needed to create an alternate reality. And obviously, there's other diagnoses that are organic processes. When something feels sudden onset, like there's a meth-induced psychosis that can last for like 2 years, like 24 months of sobriety past that methamphetamine use. Like bath salts were real big. Get them at the head shops, and people would go into psychosis from those too. There's some dangerous stuff out there. Hamilton pharmacopoeia. He in the lab he created an ego dissolution agent that lasts 72 hours. There's a lot of stuff out there that can last a long time. And so we all have our toolboxes, and it's important to recognize that those coping strategies are born on purpose. And so that's part of that naming and entertainment. That's part of that is a validation of that component of our experience. Go ahead, next slide. Okay. And then, so again, I like to tell people when they first come see me in my clinic, no regrets, not even one letter. Everything that you did got you here, and you may have been drinking like a fish for the last decade, and you didn't kill yourself, and you're still here. So good job, me, right? Like I did. And so now you're ready for something better. And so everything that you did, you needed to do. And so part of that is just validating that experience for yourself. And so, like, how do we move forward from there? It's like the Gottman relationship stuff. Like, if we just concentrate on the negatives, the shoulda, woulda, coulda, didn't does, we don't move forward. And so it's like, yeah, you can validate that. You can feel like you have to feel those repressed emotions to start healing, and we'll go more depth in that. But we also have to figure out how to move forward. And so it's really about empowerment when at our clinic. So again, the ACEs study, that adverse childhood experiences study, we know anything 3 or higher. And so it's stuff like, did my parents separate before I was 18? Did I ever feel unsafe, or did I not have enough food in the house? Was I ever sexually molested or abused? And did I have a family member that went to prison? And if you get a 3 or higher, there's more items in that scale. But those pretty much across the board are going to lead to anxiety or depression, like diagnosable at some point in your life. Anything 5 or higher will lead to somatic issues, body issues like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, autoimmune disorders like Crohn's disorder. And so it's not like when a doc goes in there and cuts you open, they're still fine. The symptomology that would define Crohn's disorder, and your body's in a survival mode. So you're not thriving. And this is something that's pretty much across the board. It's just proven 5 or higher will lead to some somatic issues eventually. And so that's why I talk about repressed and not kind of processed through trauma. It's like you're getting that male and that female rat. And you're like, hey, I don't like you guys. And you throw them in a closet and close the door. I'm like, oh. So what do those rats do? They reproduce, right? They procreate. So eventually that's going to come out. Some people it takes months, some people decades, but it comes out for everybody eventually and in some capacity. So Bessa Vandekok, I saw him talk at MAPS 2 years ago, and I'll be there again this year. But he's the author of The Body Keeps the Score. And we talk about those neuro-emotional complexes, those inflammatory corticoid clusters tied to past emotionality that wasn't safe to feel at that time in life. It's kind of held as these actual clusters of corticosteroids into your body, your fascia, largely your connective tissue, your non-vascularized areas, and your lymphatic system. That's what a lot of the implements we have at ROHCT are designed to help kind of mobilize. And that's what ketamine, a lot of the other ego dissolution agents are proven to help break up. That's why a lot of people raise blood pressure. Next slide, please. Okay. So, ego dissolution agents. So it's not great for business. I like to tell people no one needs ego dissolution agents. No one needs ketamine. A million other ways to get to a healthier headspace, and all of them are considered non-specific amplifiers of the human experience. There's a really cool study where in the 70s they gave these meditation gurus like super high doses of LSD. And they're like, that was cool, but it wasn't as deep or as focused, I guess, as I get with my meditation work. And so it's just important to recognize like it opens those doors, and there's lots of other ways to get there. So um, the stoned ape theory, that's a really interesting theory about the evolutionary process of man, basically. Like there was a tribe of apes that stumbled across psilocybin, and then they started thinking differently. And there's some micro evidence to support those types of theories now, like microdosing Fridays, where someone will set an intention to solve an engineering problem, or some other stuff that they're stuck on from like a heady perspective, and they get through it. So one thing I like to think about when people are kind of stuck is think of that gazelle, like it's got like a lion, right? It goes into this fight, flight, or freeze, like, oh no, I'm hosed, I'm dead, I'm done for. And then the lion starts stalking around thinking it's got its prey. And then the gazelle realizes it has an opening and it pops up and it runs. And it runs. And then 3 to 5 miles down the road, it's got this physiological shudder, this like cellular level release. And that's still built into our DNA. And so if we're like actively in this human doing mode, like go, 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 do, which a lot of people are, you're in this survival state. You aren't in this thrive state. And we all exist on the bell curve of every disorder in every state, in my opinion. Most of us have this much major depressive disorder. You get diagnosed with this much. People are more happy or on this side have the bell curve distribution pattern. Same thing with schizophrenia, right? Like, did I hear my name being called? You did, maybe you didn't. It happens to all of us, at least at some point. Even autism. All of us exist at this point, like on that bell curve of distribution. But definitely the kind of more traditional. And then you get pushed to the other side with that intergenerational trauma, like the genetics, epigenetics, as well as your own historical kind of what you're exposed to. And societally, I think societally, we've all shifted a little bit more towards ADHD with how many stimulus we're exposed to on a day-to-day basis. And so having that cellular level release really allows for a quick track, a fast tracking of that healing process. So in my opinion, the best kind of ego dissolution agent in general is human. So like a straight up, like you have a pineal gland, and cellularly, without your pineal gland, your cells will release endogenous DMT. You hit those really quickly with sex and with near-death experiences. Those are like the quickest fast tracks, but you can also do it through meditation. You can also do it through breath work. The Salem soft scrops, it's done a lot of like activation through breath work, and it's permissive hypercapnia. Anesthesiologists will do it as well. Um, and there's lots of ways to get there. The cold plunge, that's a good way for a lot of people too. But breath work, meditation, human connection, those are the safest, most sustainable. So again, less is more, in my opinion, when it comes to any drugs. Next slide, please, Audrey. And so after human connection, breath work, meditation, outside time, dance, sex, artwork, creation, not necessarily in that order. But then MDMA ecstasy is probably the best well-tolerated ego dissolution agent. Large swath of the population is already concerned. No cardiac abnormalities. And it looked like that was going to become available the summer of last year with Lycos Therapeutics. It was really close. And we're going to talk about some of the reasons why. We could just go into that now. So Lycos Therapeutics, the spinoff from Max, one of the arms of their studies, they had a therapist, and one of the ways they're mitigating some of the risk factors associated with longer acting ego dissolution agents, which is, we're going to talk about that, but there's a longer pitfalls because there's so much transference and countertransference amplified a ton when it comes to long acting ego dissolution agents. That means you reminded me of someone from my past. I reminded you of someone from your past. And then like wanting to heal unresolved trauma through that connection. And so a therapist entered a sexual relationship with a heavily traumatized client, and then it got out to the news. And so that's going to be a big risk factor as these agents become more widely available. It's going to happen more. It's been happening before, MDMA or Lycos, and it'll continue just because that close human connection is almost inevitable. But it's something to be really aware of for people that are in this field, because it's going to be growing. It's really important to do it ethically. Next, after MDMA, I think ketamine is the best well tolerated, and I honestly want people to start there, especially IV, because it's only really pause for people who are like heavily traumatized. You see a lot of people, the trip report and all those ones. I forget all the names, but there's all like the safety tents for bad trips, and oftentimes, well, I always tell people this: it won't come to the surface unless it's safe to come to the surface. And people need there's another opportunity to reprocess. That's a neuro emotional complex kind of coming to the surface and saying, hey, this really sucked in the past and I had to hold it down, and now it's coming and I want to take place to process through. And probably a new festival isn't necessarily the best place to do that. People are doing that a lot because that's the most accessible and the least expensive for a lot of people. But it's something to be aware of. And so then traditional psychedelics and like there's a lot of interesting science going on about the default mode network, and I don't need to go deep in the science on stuff, but there's a lot we don't know and a lot we're learning, and it's a super exciting time to be in medicine because we're actually proving past wisdom, the science that we poo-pooed for the last 120 years, because our instrumentation is getting fine enough that we can actually visualize those types of changes. Whereas before you couldn't see it, there wasn't really strong scientific evidence to go with it. Next slide, please, Gabriel. So this is kind of, again, I think, humane probably first, then MDMA for most people, and then ketamine, and then traditional psychedelics. And these, traditional psychedelics aren't as well tolerated by a large swath of the population because of the extent of perceptual distortion, particularly for people who are ego dissolution agent naive, because there's so much shifts that most people in the room probably know about. But kind of a cone of intensity traditional psychedelics, psilocybin, and obviously dose dependent, but intensity climbing. Then LSD acid, then mescaline peyote, then ayahuasca DMT, and then 5-MeO DMT. Ibogaine, some of Hamilton's pharmacopoeia stuff, salvia, like they're on the other side, and they act as novel pharmacokinetics when it comes to those. And it's really interesting. Like there's scientific derivatives, like we applied psilocybin, which they derived the psilocybin, just the chemical molecule, and they're doing an intravenous infusion over 6 to 8 hours, and that's how they're studying that as its own kind of drug that they can patent. It's interesting stuff. And so here's the 5 reasons why I think IV ketamine should be considered, particularly for those people who are ego dissolution agent naive again. It's the best bioavailability, straight to the source. You're going into a vein. This is the best efficacy profile that we know of. So 70 to 95% effective. And it's incredibly safe. So like there's no risk of serotonin syndrome like there is with ayahuasca or MDMA or psilocybin. So some people don't get a good vetting and they're on an SSRI or an SNRI, or they take a boatload of ibuprofen on a daily basis and they aren't aware of their risk of serotonin syndrome, and then they die. Like you hear a few ibogaines or ayahuasca ceremonies with the shamans are terribly good medical vetting, at least a few times a year. And it's the only one that's legal. So, we've got 3 clinics that are above ground that you can send people to. Like, we treat a lot of people who are LDS. We treat a lot of people who, have a big, strong religious capacity. We're in a safe place that's medically backed, and I have malpractice insurance and all that fun stuff. We need, right? And then I think this one's honestly the most important, the fifth reason on there. Again, particularly for those people who are highly traumatized. It's the only version you can pause. So it really keeps people in the driver's seat. So, we're doing a 45-minute infusion. I think of that ego dissolution agents as we're letting those walls down safely, right? And so for some people, those walls are anxiety. For some people, they're depression. For some people, they're alcoholism. For some people, they're marijuana use. And to some extent, for all of us, they're putting pants on in the morning. They're going to the bathroom. They're eating, right? We want to keep some of those walls up. They were born on purpose out of safety. And so we start everyone at 0.5 milligrams per kilogram over 45 minutes. It's a weight-based dosing, and it's a bit above the psychedelic dosing, which we would use for ketamine-associated psychotherapy, where you're able to talk through everything. With CAP, with any of these like talk things involved, it's really important that you have good rapport with that therapist, more important than pretty much anything else. Like someone feel like someone you can talk to. And then also it's challenging because like as a therapist, as a clinician, being able to kind of take a step back. Again, I talked about how we should still be more tribal. Like those people that I'm helping kind of do this deepest work of their lives, I should be breaking bread with them later because it's like the integration's on go. It's not just like one day and you're all better. So in the clinic setting, I think it should be I'm turning the key and getting out of the way, helping remember how capable you've always been. And then we have weekly integration groups. We have the ROHCT Wellness Bar. So we have some other kind of wraparound services to kind of continue that work. Go ahead, L'Oreal. Go back and skip one. No, never mind. Go back. Okay. So again, that setting, and experience and sustainability. So I like to show people this graph, and so we have a whole integration workbook that we give people when we go over stuff with them. And so when people first come in, again, they're in this kind of like fight, flight, or freeze state. A lot of them where they're just kind of existing and like, oh my God, like this has sucked for so long. And I've taken like 18 different meds and I've tried all this stuff. And I still feel like crap. I've talked to a therapist for the last decade and I don't feel any better. And so 95% of the work when we first come in is to help people remember how capable they've always been. Again, I had a client say it, who has resonated with me, is we're born remembering, we forget along the way, and our job is to remember again. And I just love that. Yeah, let's do that. And so 95% of the work is that physiological shudder. It's that feeling safe to feel safe, which so many people have lost. And so, and then very quickly, again, we do a series of 6 treatments at the ketamine clinic for the most part, 2 per week for 3 weeks, with individual integration 1 to 2 days after one of the sessions, and group integration at least once a week. And then we talk about all the other ways to integrate, including artwork, dance, music, and we say 40 minutes or longer of artistic practices at least 3 times a week. For people who are already artistic, I tell them to do something they're bad at least one of those sessions, because that gets you out of that kind of monkey mind of like this performative nature of like, oh, people like it when I do this shaping, or people like it when I do it like this. So being able to kind of get back into that childlike play state, super important. And then very quickly, the ketamine goes down to like 5% of the work, ideally. And that reducing toxicity, you can see that part of the graph goes up and then it goes back down. The wellness living kind of ends up being a good third of it, making things better, like long term. That's about a third of it. And so it should always be ongoing. Again, that's the kind of vision behind ROHCT: revitalize, optimize, and harmonize. Harmonize living in ikigai, which is that Japanese term of what you're good at, what you're passionate about, what the world needs, and what you can be valued for. We talk about intention setting. We go very clearly through flight instructions about how to use the medicine, like kind of where to devote your energy, how to go there safely. And we're monitoring people's vital signs the whole time, which I think is helpful again for people to feel real safe with. Um, next slide, please. And so, again, how do our treatments work? They're the non-specific amplifiers of the human experience, and they, like I've seen it do like kind of decades of work. Like if people were showing up consistently for talk therapy, they'd get a similar kind of treatment outcomes than they do in this like 3 to 4 weeks. It's bonkers. I'll have people that have been working with a therapist. The therapist kind of refers them to us, and that therapist has been seeing this client for decades and like weekly. And I don't like that. Like I think so much of our Western medicine model is that potentiated illness model where the pharmaceutical industry, insurance industry, and honestly most providers and agencies incentivized to keep them on daily meds, keep them coming back forever. So after that series of 6 and 1 month booster, like all people to apply, I don't want to see them. So it's a incredibly rewarding work. With that, we really want to do less over time, not more. And that therapist will call us and be like, oh my gosh, like, what did you do? Like this client has so much more insight than they've had like ever working with me. And it's super cool. Next slide, please. And so the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you guys may be familiar with that. So on the bottom is like that safety and security. And that's what most people get stuck on, honestly, feeling safe to feel safe. And then on the top of the Maslow's is that self-actualization, realizing who you really are. Then I like to flip the pyramid. Like once you realize who you are, where you're coming from, then only after that can you really love yourself, like for all the shoulda, woulda, coulda, didn't does, and just kind of recognizing you did the best you had or best you could with what you had. And then after that, only after that, I'd argue, could you truly love other people in your life for what they kind of bring to the table instead of being out of martyrdom? Like, I love you. And all to a detriment to myself, right? I like to think of that cup. It's like I'm filling up my cup, right? Like a lot of people are trying to fill it up like this. Like, I almost got Probably not. Right. So once you write your cup and then you really take that time and energy that you deserve and need to fill up your cup, only then can you truly give from your cup, like really, truly and greatly. And then after you love the people in your life, that next stage, then you can love everyone and everything for all of their recognizing that they too are doing the best they can with what they have. I was telling kids like you're only in charge of your reactions. You aren't in charge of anyone else. And then like Ram Dass says, just when you think you're in a good headspace, go spend a weekend with your family. Right? It's a moving target. Reels looking at me like, I'm your family. Good. Oh, you can throw it at me. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I think it's depression. People just feeling sad and they don't really recognize where it comes from. And so that's where we start with that name it to tame it, kind of validate that experience. Because that depression is a symptom, in my opinion. And that's what I've seen too. I'm like, they tell me they're depressed and they're like, just fix my depression. And then they tell me what they do today. And I'm like, I'd be depressed too, guy. Like, that sucks. And so like people don't know. I think that's the thing is like there's the funnels in marketing, right? Like so many people are not even problem aware, let alone solution aware. And so depression is what people come for, or anxiety. But then again, like you're like, wow, look at all that trauma. Like I would be anxious too. You know? And so again, I think it comes from trauma. Does that answer the question? Yeah, we get that too. And I'd say 95 to 99% of substance use disorder is a form of self medicating. Like it sucks to live up here, so I'm going to tune out, you know? I say, and you can self medicate with lots of things, right? Like the doom scroll, that's self medicating. Food, that's self medicating. Pornography, like the idiot box, that's what my mom called it. It's like, there's lots of ways to self medicate. The most obvious are like alcoholism or marijuana, like we're just like, I don't want to think about anything. So I'm just going to kind of check out. But yeah, I'd say it's like depression, then anxiety, and then probably some self medicate. kind of in that order. And so that brings to this one, which I really like. People want to come in and they want this ketamine treatment to fix them. It's like, do everything for me, like fix me, like I'm broken. And it's like dude, there's no silver bullet. There's a million silver peaks. And that's what's important to recognize. Like, this is a catalyst, it's not a cure. And so, like, I've seen so many people who are like, oh, I didn't, like, I've seen a lot of people, like, I did hundreds of ayahuasca ceremonies. They just did 5-MeO, I did ibogaine. And I'm like, we need to integrate. You don't need to do ketamine. Like, you have all these lessons and you haven't changed anything. And so it's not necessarily like they all work the same. Ketamine's the only one that's here like legally. Like I think ibogaine's probably like the most intense that I know of. That like 22-hour ride.
And they're actually building a place down in Mesa.
Oh, really?
They're trying to be the first clinic to be able to legally do ibogaine.
Yeah. There's a bunch of churches. There's ways to circumvent things, but they all work the same. In my opinion, they're letting those walls down safely. They're helping you name it to tame it. They're helping you feel it to heal it. I like ketamine because it's a dissociative anesthetic. So I'd say zoom out far enough, you can find the gift. And I think that that's an important way to look at things. Like instead of like viscerally living through your trauma, like you may with EMDR or you may with cognitive behavioral therapy, like you're actually like experiencing like some of your worst trauma. Like that Inside Out movie, you guys remember where they walk through the hippocampus and they change from like being their normal characters to like shapes and colors. Like so people are processing through their worst trauma as like stretching, floating, and like colors and lights, and they just feel lighter when they're done. And again, like that got me at like, how do we move forward? And so we don't always know. Like you don't know the kind of stress level your mom was when she was pregnant with you. And then you hear about later, but you just know that how stressed you were coming out. Like so it's a really cool part. So this kid, he came in and he's like always been this ball of energy. And I told him about all the types of trauma, and he's like, oh my God, like that hit so hard. He was like 8, and he went into like a dissociative fugue state, like where he had like multiple identities and like was like hearing all these voices. And it was right after he listened to Down Periscope, and he heard that like the ping ping, the sonar sound. And then he found out his grandpa almost died in the submarine. Like then came home and made his dad. And so like it was just a couple generations behind him. But they went through this really terrible trauma. There's also this rosewater study where they gave rats rosewater and then traumatized the predator, like burned them, shocked them, almost drowned them. But they exposed them to rosewater every time before they did that. And then they stopped exposing them to rosewater, stopped traumatizing them, let them procreate. 5 generations below, they exposed them to rosewater right away. And then they immediately went into a fight, flight, or freeze state, like bumping all these inflammatory corticoids. And so, again, it's helping our genetic material. And it's healable. Like we all think of good.
Question. So if you're talking about how ketamine therapy rewires new pathways in the brain, what would you say the main difference between EMDR and ketamine therapy is? Or main differences?
Yeah, I movement desensitization and reprocessing. So I'm trained in that as well. And so you're using bilateral stimulation either through cardinal gaze or through TheraTappers, or some other, like some people do tapping, some people. And then there's also like EFT, which is emotional freeing technique. There's NET. There's like where my buddy says it, and like where you see overlap is where you see the truth. So there's lots of ways to get there. And so eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. I think what gets messed up is a lot of people are just seeing that clinician once a week, and they don't spend the right time to create the safe place and the safe like container for that trauma to come up, because that trauma's been stored for a while, and then they'll shake the snow globe and they'll send them out without resourcing them properly. I'm not saying that ketamine can't do that, but we built this, 2 per week for 3 weeks. And so I've seen more activation with EMDR than I have with ketamine, as far as like the repressed trauma coming up without it being processed. And so then it goes back in, and when it comes out again, it's worse. And so, but it works similarly in that it's helping you process like deeply held stuff And so like EMDR is like a specialized form of therapy where you're hopefully doing resourcing first, again, creating a safe place and a safe container. And then after that, you're kind of helping them bring up one of those really traumatic memories. And then you're helping them reprocess through it. And so the founder of EMDR, I forget her name, but she found out when she was walking through the forest, and she would like look through this, and when she was like looking, just tracking her environment, right? Like you would normally do when you're going for a walk. And when she was thinking about something hard, the like her own trauma, then it would be less activated when she got back from that walk. And she's like, oh, that's interesting. And so she started figuring out a way. And all those therapy modalities, like EMDR is a big one right now, but it's like $5,000 to get certified level 1 and then 12,000 to get certified level 2. It's like kind of a racket. And so like I think there's lots of ways to get there. If because they're in therapy, there's like cheaper ways to do it. So talk to me if you want to know more about EMDR. There's a similar kind again, it's humaning, right? Non-specific amplifier of the human experience with ketamine and all the other ego dissolution agents. And so EMDR is tapping into some of that humaning process as well. And you're looking at like lots of downstream kind of mechanisms. I'd say, you know, I've seen worse outcomes with EMDR than I have with ketamine,
Really?
but that's probably because of the practitioner, you know, like because I've seen really shitty outcomes with ketamine shit in
I've
clinics.
had both, so I just wanted to know your opinion.
Yeah, yeah.
That's very interesting.
Oh yeah, so some tools for processing trauma. We go through the ACCEPT acronym cycle, fifths of every life, where you're acknowledging that emotion, breathing into it, being curious with it. This is a little longer than I'd want to do, but forgiveness is not for anyone else; it's for you, and that's how you move forward from things. And so, again, neuroplastogens. So within 2 or 3 minutes of starting the ketamine infusion, like just all by itself, nothing else. Like some clinics will just let people play on their phones. Like we do eye shades and noise canceling headphones, help them set an intention, go through flight instructions. But with or without that, 2 or 3 minutes of starting an infusion, we see new dendrites forming on a functional MRI, which is that ability to quite literally change your mind. So you can think of the depression, the anxiety, the hypervigilance, the substance use disorder. They're like sled tracks, right? You go down a sled track a couple times, it's pretty hard line. Go down a million times, it's like a toboggan trail, almost impossible to get off of. So when you do that series of 6 infusions, it's like stacking those bell curves on top of one another. You do one, it's about 10 to 14 days, really good neuroplasticity. When you do that series of 6, there's more neuroplasticity and there's a longer duration that it lasts for. 70 to 95% is not 100%. So right before the 6th treatment, we determine if we're going to recommend more ketamine for someone or not. Because it doesn't work for everybody, like anything else. If it does work for them, then we recommend a single booster, like 3 to 5 weeks after their 6th one. And that gives people 80 days at least on the short end of neuroplasticity. So it's like 5 feet of fresh fallen snow on top of those old sled tracks. And we know 80 days is the top end that human beings need to create new habits and to break old habits. That means that very much energy in, energy out kind of equation. And so we try to really express that. Pitfalls and warnings. If we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it. So huge body of evidence coming out in the 1960s, 1970s about how effective all the ego dissolution agents were curative for PTSD, curative for alcoholism, curative for panic disorder, major depressive disorder, suicidality. And then in my opinion, at least part of what happened was some of the clinicians, some of the researchers started getting high on their own supply, started dipping in their own supply, and then became overzealous about the treatments as a panacea, as a cure-all. Started joking about slipping into water supplies, slipping into politicians, lost their credence as non-biased researchers, non-biased clinicians. So when the inevitable other foot dropped of the kind of capitalistic, consumeristic model that we live in, those researchers, those clinicians didn't have legs to stand on. So I've never done ketamine therapy myself. And I think that at least at this point where I'm at, not having done it allows me to give it to more people for longer. So be able to kind of be at a space where I can just be curious. And I do feel like we're probably due for a correction. Everyone's so excited. And so it's important to kind of be cognizant of that. Again, if we don't learn from history, we're going to repeat it. And again, the longer acting ego dissolution agents like MDMA, psilocybin, we're hearing more of those kind of like those type stories where it's like there's a lot of closeness happening that we've got to be wary of in a clinical setting, just because it, like I said, sexual relationships with clients is frowned upon in psychiatry, any sort of clinical role. And then, there's a lot of shamanism and psychedelic tourism. People get excited about these medicines. They do them a couple times. They're like, I feel so much better. I want to tell everybody about that. And they haven't done their own integration work. And so then you hear about like a lot of kind of victimization occurring kind of across the landscape. So being very aware that that's a possibility, even likelihood, and then like doing your due diligence if you're looking at a clinic, you're looking at potentially looking at treatment somewhere. I like that one. Nothing's inherently good or bad. Dose makes medicine, dose makes the poison, right? You can overdo yoga, underdo yoga, overdo water, underdo water. Same thing with ego dissolution agents, obviously. And I like everything in moderation, including moderation. Things not to do, things to do. We know these things will reduce neuroplasticity, like the SAD diet, right? The standard American diet. Increases inflammation, increases depression, increases anxiety, decreases focus and attention. And it's ubiquitous. It's impossible to like completely get away from. Really, really challenging. And so that being said, like I don't want people to show up to, a kid's birthday party with boiled chicken. Like I want you to be able to have a slice of cake, have a scoop of ice cream. It's like when you're on scoop 6 or 7, you might want to think about myself medicating to some extent with it. So we go over all this stuff kind of in depth with our clients that are coming throughout our accounts. So in closing, if you or someone else, feels stuck, you're feeling like there's room for improvement. And again, like start with meditation, start with physical activity, start with all the lower hanging fruit, the free stuff. Start at ROHCT and try some of that wellness stuff. Infrared sauna, cold plunge. Cold plunge is like totally any good solution. Like, oh my gosh, that gets you good
Every morning, man.
Awesome, I love it. That should
Never want to do it.
I know. Yeah, well, that's the thing. When you're surviving something really hard, there's a lot of medicine to that. And so know that like if anyone's really struggling, like ketamine treatments are 95% effective for suicidality. Like I've had some friends take their lives in the last couple of years, and I'm like I would have given you these treatments. Like it's so sad, like people just aren't aware. And so like there's lots of ways to get there. Again, no one needs these medicines. Even though I'm a psychiatric provider, I'm not your psychiatric provider. So caveat there. If you guys are interested in learning anything more about, again, it's ROHCT, Revitalize, Optimize, and Harmonize Clinic and Therapeutics, and Revitalize Ketamine Clinics. ROHCT is right across from Target and Prescott Valley. Prescott Valley is a little bit bigger. We got the hyperbaric chamber, the sensory deprivation tank there. We got the vibration plate, the infrared sauna, red light therapy, the full body lymphatic massage, hot flower. Love that thing. Best hug ever. And then the cold plunge. And awesome. So it's IV therapy. We can do oral ketamine at home. A lot of people are doing that. Again, I'm a bigger proponent of IV in clinic just for all sorts of reasons. But we have in-person integration groups at all 3 of our clinics. Go ahead. This is some history on ketamine. Go ahead. And then, the first like real study that I saw on ketamine was in the late 1980s out of a teaching hospital in Russia. Pretty wild. Like they're like you start digging on some of these topics and you just find like the most interesting stuff. So there was a teaching hospital out of Russia. They were doing like the first intravenous ketamine kind of study, and it was like curing World War veterans trauma. Like they were just feeling a heck of a lot better. And there was this traveling group of gypsies that came out of nowhere, and they're like, "You're doing something on the 12th floor of your hospital. I need to go up there and see it." And then like they go up there and introduce them to the doctor, and they weren't publicizing these studies or anything. Like you're sending these people to our meditation realm, and we want to see how you're doing it. And so it's interesting stuff. Like there's so much stuff we don't know at this point. It's cool. It's interesting. Like I said, we're proving past wisdom with science. We're getting there. There's a couple of interesting researchers that are working out of Stanford. Like one of my favorite conferences I ever went to was the Science and Spirituality of Psychedelics down in Phoenix. It was really good. There's some interesting stuff. Lots of good work. Yeah, they're not for everyone. You know, we start with consultation. So I'm not like you got money, you want to see me, like here's ketamine. It's like we do an assessment, we do a consultation. Like some people aren't gonna recommend it for. We do TMS, which is a non-invasive, non-medication treatment for depression. Tim Ferriss is super. He used to be more into ketamine treatment, and now with all the mind blooms and other kind of ubiquitous availability. I mean, you can get like magic mushroom bars at gas stations. Yeah, it's bonkers. You know, that being said, like they done that study out of Oxford where per capita, like the most dangerous drug that people could use is alcohol. The least dangerous is psilocybin. So take that for what it's worth. But you know, not everyone's a candidate. Like I've turned people away before, and then sometimes we'll have, like scheduled for a treatment, and they'll come in and they'll have heartburn we didn't know about. It's like, well, I'm not going to give you something that raises your blood pressure if we don't know what the etiology of that is. So not everyone's a good candidate, but most people aren't. And Tim Ferriss, he was much more into the ketamine treatments, and now he's much more into TMS. It's pretty interesting too. They're just released a 1 day protocol, and it also stimulates a lot of neuroplasticity. And it's a magnetic coil on your forehead. Yeah, rapid transcranial magnetic stimulation. So it's like modern day frequency healing. Like I want to put it on a head-to-head study versus like sound healing. It'd be really interesting. But it's stimulating the dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex. So we do a motor mapping. And so we actually hit the motor band first, and we'll see motor movement from the magnetic stimulation. Then we move forward from there from an anatomical mapping position. So we're stimulating the dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex. Traditional treatment is 36 daily treatments that last about 18 minutes. We just got the beta burst upgrades to our machines. And so that instead of 18 minutes, it goes down to like almost 3 minutes. So you can do like a 1 day protocol or even 20 treatments in a day. But it's like next level, like it's human optimization, like pro-cognitive. It's like all this stuff. Like I love TMS. Like I'll do TMS all day. It feels amazing. Good. This is a little bit of how to prepare for ketamine treatments. Good. People like to see the addiction potential, you know, of medications. So all the ego dissolution agents are on the bottom of here. There's like the active dose, lethal dose versus the dependence, the addiction potential. I think refined sugar's up here somewhere. This is a little bit more of the intention setting guide, flight instructions. But, and then that's me. So thanks everybody for coming. Resolution through ego dissolution. What questions do anyone have? I do not. Yeah, yeah, and there's a mixed bag on that. Some people absolutely think that's imperative. I think it's very much more important what happens afterwards than what happens during. Some people it's all dark and shitty, like they really don't like it. Hey, good timing, right? and and some people like they get all these like crazy like insights as far as like where I should go, all these things I should do. And some people it's just nothing but darkness. And then more often than not, it's pretty pleasant. Again, as the dosing goes up, there's two kind of like dosing thresholds. The first one is that psychedelic dosing, where people are pretty aware that they're in a chair, they're aware that, you know, they can press their call button or call out. The next dosing threshold is really worth talking about is the anesthetic threshold, because Ken's on the World Health Organization's list of essential medications as an anesthetic. Like we're giving 0.5 milligrams per kilogram over 45 minutes. Pre-hospital, like paramedics, they're giving 2 to 5 milligrams per kilogram intramuscularly all at once. They can amputate legs, they can do C-sections. They say they'll be on the first trip to Mars, but they can do it all by itself. Not to give anything else with it. They've done cohort studies where like people in Afghanistan and like military, like their platoon just gets blown to smithereens. And one group of the cohort, they'll give traditional kind of anesthetics to, like the sevoflurane anesthetic gases, opioids, benzodiazepines. And the other group, they just give ketamine to. And the group that gives ketamine, way lower incidence of PTSD. And they don't remember anything. It is time travel. So like 3 to 5 days later, both groups are waking up in Germany. And they don't know what happened. They just remember the initial.
We used to get fentanyl.
Jeez, yeah. 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 And so like it's a mixed bag. There's definitely clinicians that would disagree with me and that think it's very important for the experience. I don't think it is. I think you get the neuroplasticity effects regardless. It's like dose dependent with that. And then I really like the harp on because it's you can't live in there, right? So it's about what you do afterwards. Yeah, yeah, and that's what we're working on with EPIK Biosciences. We got pretty exciting drug IP to be able to let the wraps off of like June to July. Yeah, so because yeah, I'm a big proponent of that because I think less is more. Like I'd like people to not take any drugs, any medications, anything kind of mind altering. And I want you to just plug into what you're like internally capable of. But I've always thought about that. Like, no.
That's why I actually question
What's permanent?
the body. I don't know somewhere.
I don't think anything's permanent. Like I think that we're all like dynamic beings. So I think like it'll shift something and something will change. Like I don't really like the argument of I have a neurochemical imbalance. Well, of course you do, like because you're depressed, and it's like a cycle. You can cycle upwards and you can cycle downwards, right? And so if you're watching TV all day, you're eating ho hos and ding dongs. You aren't being physically active, or you do like two ketamine treatments and then you start training for a marathon and you're like eating really healthy and cold plunging every morning. Like it's more than just one piece of the puzzle. And so the neuroplasticity, like those new dendrites, yeah, those are probably going to be there forever until you lose them with, not keeping them active. But like it definitely isn't permanent, like as far as the positive changes that occur. Like some people will just lean into the ketamine and they're like, I feel so much better, and they go back to their same old shitty existence. Like I said, I would be depressed and anxious too. That societal trauma, that it's rough out there. And then they come back, way too frequently, which they wouldn't necessarily need to if they were doing more things to kind of change their situation externally. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I guess
Yeah, like there's
fried brain per se.
yeah, and people are on like a lot of ketamine. I think it's fairly safe from the drug perspective. Like obviously Matthew Perry was not safe, but he got like 30 injections that night and he was on opioids too. Like so he was, and he's swimming by himself. We don't recommend that. Like a TBI traumatic brain injury, like that's, current like forever. Like an anoxic injury, like a stroke, like that's forever. Like concussive blasts. There's arguments, like there's research going on at Johns Hopkins University for psilocybin and MDMA and ketamine for, changing because they all do new dendritic connections. For drug abuse, like again, when there's substance use that's rooted in trauma, if you can address the root trauma, then oftentimes that need to self medicate goes dramatically down. Could they pick it back up again? Totally. Again, that societal and the environmental reactivate the historical and the intergenerational. And so it's like you'll always have that predisposition or propensity to go there, but not necessarily like isn't necessarily going to occur. And it's a very much like anything else, an energy in, energy out, and how much they want it. Like I've seen some really broken people that are like, I want to get better, but they only halfway want to get better because there's something about a relationship that they find a lot of value in about being in a broken individual. They're getting an attention that they wouldn't get if they weren't damaged. And so that's an interesting thing to dive into. Big discussion. Oh man, way too many. Yeah, yeah, because it was like I learned a long time ago in healthcare. Like I'm not in the business of carrying people over the finish line, right? It just burns me out, and then it disempowers them. So a lot of the times, like I give most of the people who come through our clinic, like most of this information, as far as like where things are coming from, and kind of get that name of containment, feel it, making those shifts, and why they should be devoting the energy to that. That being said, a lot of people aren't ready to put the work in, and they do want a magic bullet. Most people do, because they aren't going to psychiatry because they're ready to work on themselves. They want someone else to fix them, right? And some we all need a kickstart sometimes, So again, everything in moderation, food in moderation. Right? Yeah, it's super cool to see too. So like it's a downstream effect because like those there was a really cool book. It's in our book recommendation list, like healing from trauma or something. And it was like this anecdotal story of this little girl who's hiding in her closet because her stepfather was looking for her to do bad things to her. And then she had this visualization of this fairy stepmother, like godmother, that came in there with a magic wand and was like, "I'm gonna treat you with some magic right now, and my magic unfortunately isn't going to be able to get you out of this situation, but I'm gonna use my magic wand. I'm gonna tap it on your head and your belly, and you're going to be able to hold on to a lot of this hard stuff in there instead of in your brain." And so, like, people hold a lot of chronic illness in their guts, they hold a lot of chronic illness kind of systemically. And then what we see is when you actually feel safe to feel safe, you get that physiological shudder. Then 3 to 6 months down the road, a lot of those inflammatory biomarkers go way down. And that's super cool. Like CRP, other kind of autoimmune markers will really markedly decrease. And your body's like online healing ability comes back online. Because again, you aren't living in the survival state, this go, 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 do, like hypervigilant state. You're like, okay, wow, this is what safety at the core feels like. It's super cool. It's like such rewarding work. Like, and it's a the journey to wellness is just that it's a journey. Like there's no like endpoint. You may hit some plateaus along the way. But just you guys being here, like the 5 year stock market graph, like you zoom out, it looks really good. You zoom in, like most humans, like there's gonna be some days, weeks, and months that you can suck sometimes. And that's part of the journey. So being able to let the work be your joy, like the cold plunge, like they suck, like they really do, they aren't fun. But surviving something difficult to start your day, like it's such a win. And so it's like a real fast track. It's like it really is biohacking. Yeah. But so is meditation and so is yoga. So is conscious human connection, cuddle puddles. You guys got to come to ROHCT, be in there doing cuddle puddles on Thursdays. It's a good time. Platonic intimacy. Flow Friday, like quickest way to neuroplasticity is picking up a new toy, playing with it. So we do Flow Art Friday. And we do like open decks DJ night on Wednesday. And we're gonna start serving kava out of there. We have functional mushrooms, adaptogen. We have the song, the cold plunge. It's like a precursor to or after care for, or just all instead of RKC Revitalize. It's good stuff. Any other questions?
You mentioned strokes and other brain problems. Has there been any studies with psychedelics or anything that actually help people with stroke?
Yeah,
or,
absolutely. Like that.
research, et cetera?
Yeah, like so it's a combination, get more avenues to address a problem from, more likely you're going to get capture. Hyperbaric therapy, really helpful for past strokes. Cold therapy can be helpful. NAD can be really helpful. And then ketamine, like what happens, it depends on the etiology of, the stroke or the brain injury. If it's fresher, it's easier to treat. If it's ischemic, it's easier to treat than hemorrhagic. And so like getting that blood pressure, like one thing that's cool about the intravenous ketamine is it raises your systolic blood pressure like 20 to 30 points, like in an infusion. Hey. And then part of that is it gets more of the ketamine across your blood-brain barrier, which increases your cerebral perfusion pressure. And so, yeah, all of them, like they're working on it. So, and so it's super exciting. Probably over time. Good question. Yeah. Does that answer it?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I do have one last question. What are the types of intentions that you? I know you had it on your sheet,
Yeah.
but skipped over it.
Yeah, it kind of ways it. So
It isn't like, oh, I'm going to change my life, and you have to be more goal oriented or specific, or what do you?
yeah, so like I'll go into it, but like there's like the intentions really be for you, by you, and about you, right? So like you want the right kind of selfishness coming into that, again, that cup. And so like it should be for you. I'll help people kind of set it. It can be words, like concepts or feelings. So like a lot of people come in, they've already done the due diligence kind of stuff and dove in a bit. So trusting the process is a solid one. It's kind of like, okay, like I don't know what'll happen. And that's the big thing about ego dissolution agents is they'll give you what you need, not necessarily what you want. And so you come in there with this intention of healing this trauma or working through this, and then you'll go on a very circumferential kind of pathway that'll bring you back to your intention like 2 years later. Maybe. and so and subconsciously. And then sometimes you'll dive right into it. And so everyone's really different. And that's why it helps to just be curious on my end. Concept, like a therapist came up with this one with a shared client. I really like it. So think of the core of you as like a robust old growth forest, like big old redwood trees, like well nourished, well hydrated, unlike most forests. But then all the crap you're holding on to, be that hypervigilance, be that physical injury, be that depression, as underbrush in that otherwise healthy forest. I think like sleeping beauty brambles will dry out and poke you right now. And then think of the ketamine treatment as a lightning strike, a thunderstorm that's going to start a fire, a forest fire in there to help burn off all that crap that no longer serves you. Leave those nutrients in the soil and help wash them in there so your forest gets even stronger, more robust. So that's an intention. Another one is feeling, like knowing how you want to feel, bring that into it. There shouldn't be any negatives in an intention. So any stops, don'ts, or no's. Like it should be pretty broad, like being okay, like loving yourself, accepting yourself, and try to keep things in your own control. You know, like I don't want my wife to be happy. It's like that's probably not. And then like really don't get too caught up in creating perfect intention. And that says it on that slide. It's like as your walls come down, your innate healing wisdom comes online. And again, you'll take yourself where you need to go to get you to kind of why you're there. Like you presented for a reason, like you aren't showing up just willy-nilly, probably. All right. Does that make sense? Yeah, cool. Good question. Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Gabriel, what's your question? All right. Cool. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you all.
Thanks for watching Psychedelic Psychiatry, Trauma Resolution through Ego Dissolution. I'm your host and speaker, Casey Dubravcic, the co-founder of EPIK Biosciences, the founder and CEO of Revitalize Ketamine Clinics, as well as ROHCT Wellness Bar. I'm a psychiatric provider who's passionate about helping you live your very best life. Reach out to me today if you'd like to learn more about any of the projects that I'm working on. pcdubra.com